I have the honor of inviting Mr. Rajendra Singh Pawar, Chairman and Co-founder NIIT Group. He is the recipient of Padma Bhushan Award. His contribution to the development of India's IT industry have been widely acknowledged. May I now request Mr. Pawar for his keynote speech on the past, present, and future of EdTech. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Neha, and thanks, Rajesh, for setting the context and for inviting everybody. So, as Neha mentioned, this is the second cycle, should we say, of this Edtech Summit, followed by Edtech Growth Camp. And I'm personally delighted to be involved with this. I have quite obviously done the journey, starting very long back, but now I'm excited to see the new journey of young people who are putting their shoulder to the very fundamental subject of education. So there's 42 years of experience. And so when I talk of past, it's a very long past, but I'll keep that session short, and the present where we are now, and of course, taking a look into the future. So let me break up this last 42 years into the first 25 years, that is 1982 till 2007. And I'll touch on how that panned out, and then go to which I call the past. And from 2007, I'm using that term for the present for a set of reasons which I'll explain. And I'll touch upon the last 15 years or so, which I'm terming as the period called the present, and what have been the highlights. But quite clearly, the objective is to talk about the future. But I'm one of the believers that you can't build a future if you forget your past. So it's important to know the past, the lessons from the past. So let me begin by talking of the period between 82 and 2007, which I'm terming as the past. And I'm labeling this period as from tech ed to edtech. That's the caption of this part. So we started in December 81, set up the company 81, started operations in 82. And we realized as NIIT, we were going to build talent for a sector which was just getting born. And we realized that there was a shortage of people to run the computer that India was going to make. And if there's a shortage of that talent, then who's going to train them? Because you don't have software professionals, then you're unlikely to have enough faculty, because the best of the faculty would be attracted by the big IT companies or computer companies, then to use that term. So we realized that if we had to build talent, we had to use technology. And technology at that time was basically color TV and video. And of course, the state of the art then also was the overhead projectors where you put flipped foils to be able to communicate what you wanted to, rather than do the chalk and talk. And this area then became the cutting edge of technology, that video-aided instruction. And around that time, people were dabbling, and we were also dabbling with the use of computers in learning. And NCRT had a very bright professor, Jalaluddin, who was also dabbling with that area. So we interacted with them a lot and started looking at how to use computers in the classroom. In fact, around that time, NCRT had received a big gift of the Acorn computers from BBC Micro, as it was called, built by Acorn as a company in UK. And these were beginning to get experimented with in a few schools. And in this setting is when NIIT started expanding its operation. And the 80s created a huge demand. We saw our expansion take us into the metros first. And then we realized the growth was exceeding our capacity, and therefore we innovated. Usage of technology was only one, but then even the business model innovation had to be done, and we thought of creating partners who were people like us, whom we could help set up their operations in smaller cities. And the term franchising was common, but we always use the word business partner for a reason. But we went from the few centers in the metros, all the way eventually in the next 2 decades to about 2,000 centers in up to 40 countries at peak. And I recall that 1999 was a period when government was also deeply concerned about the digital divide. And we were called upon to participate, and then we created the first of the boot, build, own, operate, own and transfer model to work along with government, in addition to our centers all over the country and all over the world, to work with government schools in the smaller towns and villages and teach them IT. And that was a very successful, one of the early successes in the public-private partnership model. And over the next decade, having started in 99, we trained more than 11 million children in about 26,000 schools, covering most states of the country. In fact, that was also the time when when the dot-com bust happened, 2001, very important milestone in that journey. The concern about digital literacy was around. People realized lots was going to happen. There was the whole talk of Y2K and the huge excitement about it. And also the recognition that India had to solve the digital divide problem. And then it was up to leaders also to say, and I remember that we, in 2001, soon after the dot-com bust, we decided that we should educate leaders as well. And I recall the time in the Parliament House where we did a training program for parliamentarians. Well, there were many welcoming people, but the key achievement for our team then was to go into the Legislative Assembly of West Bengal, which many people remember were the ones who were opposing computerization, and do a training program for all the legislators of West Bengal at that time. So we did all of these things, and alongside a whole industry had got created by then, people participating in this period. And then, of course, post the dot-com bust, there was some kind of shakeout at that time because there had been too much of a mushrooming, and there was kind of range of quality, and then people selected. And we arrived, the internet had arrived, but internet was very slow. But by the early years, by the mid-2000s, it was becoming sensible, reasonable speeds. And then we saw, and I took 2007 as a point to say the present, because the internet started becoming an important vehicle. And many of you recall the MOOCs came around that time. The term was coined, I think, in 2008 by 2 professors in Canada, George Siemens being one of them, and Dave Cormier, I think, was the other one. And they coined this term for massive open, online open courses. And I timestamped the present from the period of the MOOCs, so connected knowledge, as they called it, the coming of Khan Academy, 2008, and then Udacity, 2011, edX, 2012, Coursera, 2012. They arrived on the scene and started, there was a lot of discussion. And so this present, I am actually, again, looking at 3 significant things, not timestamped, but a sequence. So first is the era of MOOCs, which grew all the way. And then I look at a bit before COVID, and I use the word from MOOCs to flukes, because too many things happened, too much action, too much of money coming in. And then COVID, unexpected action, which forced everybody to learn. And that created an unbelievable, should we say, acceleration of what was already beginning to happen from 2017 on, when the net was becoming very important for learning. So this period of massive growth continued through till the end of COVID. And so MOOCs to flukes, and then I use the word nukes, because too many unfortunate things happened in the last couple of years. So if I look at the MOOCs period also, and then we do know that valuation became a big game, but 2015, Udacity was valued at 900 million. and last year it was down to 100 million. edX was sold to 2U. 2U bought it for 800 million. And today, 2U itself is valued at half of that amount. And of course, in this rise and build up, Indian companies received, startups and the others received $2.3 billion as funding for growth. Went to 4.2 in the financial year 20, which is before March 20. And in the subsequent year, which is the year of COVID, the first year still went up to 4.7. But then we do know that the 3 quarters of the last year it went, so 4.7 would mean something like 2.2 per quarter. So last year, first quarter, 1.4 billion, second quarter, 0.6, and third quarter, 0.14 billion. So huge amount of stress, should we say. And not just that, we heard about all the news. I don't want to go into that. I think that's not for me to talk about. Everybody here knows it. The layoffs in the sector, shutdowns, and so on. And so this whole period up till now, the second part, which I talked about, the 15 years from MOOCs to flukes and then to nukes, has been, again, a very tumultuous, enjoyable, exciting, but very difficult time towards the end. And huge amount of lessons during this period, huge amount of lessons. And I think with that, now I really want to go to the future, because some of the lessons learned during the recent past are going to be things that I want to talk about. And when I look at 2002 and beyond, I want to label this period as large opportunities, very large opportunities, but you have to tread carefully. Large opportunities, tread carefully. And that's the theme I want to talk of the future that we are getting into. So when we talk of opportunities, and some of these things have been talked of, it's not the first time I'm mentioning, is that there's some numbers which define the potential scope. So global education, $6 trillion a year. World population crossed 8 billion on 15 November last year. India's population is exceeding China's. By some measures, happened already. And total literacy is still very low in India. In fact, from school to college, when we look at that cohort, the gross enrollment ratio in higher ed is only 1 out of 4. And we have to go well beyond 3 out of 4. And alongside this new crop which comes in every year, we know that the working life of people are working quite actively till 70. And in academic circles, is going beyond that as well. So working life is increasing as well. And this is happening in an era where there's massive change around all of us. And therefore, in addition to the new college youngsters coming in looking for jobs, those who are in their jobs are staying longer, and everyone in their job is expected to learn new things on a daily basis. And the technology that can provide all of this, accelerated by AI and ML and data science and simulation and 5G for networks, all of that is in the melting pot. So we can see that there's an enormity of what needs to be done in the space of EdTech. But I also want to talk and reflect back a bit on the risks, because there's talk of saying tread carefully. And treading carefully, I think, is really the conversation I want to spend time on, because that's where I draw upon the lessons. So in treading carefully, I'm using 2 words. One word is quicksand, and the second is going to be minefields. So what's the quicksand? The quicksand, and many of you on the line know this, on the show program know this, that sustainability for edtechs, particularly made visible during this funding winter, and is that we are spending much more than we are earning. And that's what I mean by quicksand. You're trying to flap around, but the sand is pulling you down. And we are operating We've been talking about 6 rupees to be spent to earn 1 rupee, or 2 rupees to be spent to earn 1 rupee. And when the rupees were floating, it was fine. But when you don't have it, you have to spend less than 1 rupee. We are saying to spend 20 paise maybe, or less. So 20% of revenue, but currently we are at a multiple of revenue. And that is the quicksand. It takes you down very quickly, very helplessly. And I think that recognition is there in front of everybody, that this is not a way that this sector can seize this humongous opportunity which is there in front of us. And therefore, sustainability is the key. Absolutely is the key. And sustainability here, I'm referring to financial viability. I'm talking about saying that you have to spend less than you earn. And this is a mentality I think everybody is fully aware of right now, trying to figure out ways and means, and sometimes very drastic means, very painful means, particularly when it comes to dealing with people that you've brought in, nurtured, and who have been contributing. Very tough, hard decisions to be taken. And this is a huge, huge question that we need to be single-mindedly focused on, to say, how do we earn more than we spend? How do we spend more than we earn and still grow? And so it's an acid test for a community of startups who were told that grow at any cost, because you'll grow past your problems, you'll fail fast, do many, many things and keep failing because you don't know which of your 20 things will work. So the luxury of doing that is gone, at least for the near future, is gone. And therefore, I just want to emphasize that this quicksand phenomena is catching many of us, and we need to get our way out of this quicksand. And then the minefields. And I want to list a few. Some are the context we are in, and therefore not so easily changeable. Some are expectations from the sector, and therefore the perceptions of society about the sector's behavior and rules and guidelines and what they consider good and bad. And then, of course, about what we should do going forward. And of course, much of the discussion today is going to be around how do we go forward, and therefore I'll only touch on the essentials. So first of all, in the minefields, I mean, education, there's a societal mindset. So, and this is global, but predominantly historical, that there are some things which we as citizens of a country expect the state to do, the public goods as we call it. Okay, if you have parks in your colony, they're meant to be public goods. If you have roads, public goods. I mean, you do pay for it through some taxes, but public goods. Healthcare has always been public good, except that when no money available, we then have to, government has to bring out policy to say, how do we get non-government players to come in? And education. Education, perhaps the last area which government wants to yield to non-formal players. But, and we know that the budget, I mean, all of you, many of you I'm sure track the education budget. And for the last 50 years or more, we've been talking about pegging the education as part of GDP at a certain number. The Kothari Commission 1966 said 6% and never went anywhere near that. In fact, till the last budget, not the one which came out this year, we were slipping down from 4 towards 3.5, 3.2, 3.1. And this year's budget, which is announced recently, is 2.9%. So now government obviously has priorities. They give importance to education, but there are many other things which show up. And therefore, even the NEP, which came in 2020, talked about saying that 6% of budget is required to implement the policy. So that money does not exist because the country has priorities, and we accept that. But if that money is not available, then government has no option but to say we bring in the non-formal, non-government players. And if that money comes in with some expectations. But as citizens, and I can say this, I'm sure, for all of you, then when your children go to school or your siblings go to school and the fee goes up, we don't like it. We just, it's a revulsion deep down in the system, because, how can you pay? Why doesn't education come for free? So this societal mindset has yet to reconcile with the reality that country after country is recognizing that government alone can't take the burden of education, and that non-government players have to come in. But if non-government players come in, they could be foundations, not enough money. And if it's capital which is coming in, which is seeking a return, then you're half closing your eyes to the fact that, well, this is now for profit, and education by law, at least degree giving or school going education by law, is not for profit. So this has not been reconciled, and therefore, much as we are asked to contribute to the education process, each one of us has a part of us which says, well, why am I paying so much fee? Now, countries like US have experimented. They've permitted for profit in degree giving, and then have had to pull back. At least twice they've had some serious backlash, organizations, because I think this reconciliation is not going to happen so easily, that education is not a public good. And then we want to do equity. So when we talk about digital divide, I gave the example of the government schools. The government funded that. And now increasingly, we have a foundation as well, which works with companies like the Dells and the large corporations to get their CSR to go to children who can't afford to pay. And if you have to do that equity, then how do you make it viable? Is a minefield. And so the government response is, okay, get involved, but you'll have to play by the rules. And therefore, regulation comes in. And regulation is something which I just want to leave as a serious caution for everybody who's on this call, because in the last couple of years, we've seen how there's been an overreach of regulation, because there's an expectation that people are not playing by the rules, or people have gone overboard in trying to commercialize things. So regulation is important. I was reading in the newspaper, I think yesterday, even today there's some write-up that government wants to be more mindful of how private players participate. And since much of the work that even the private sector players overlap with formal, this becomes truly a minefield, which we have to look at. And then there's internal regulations. One is external regulation the government does. Internal is all about governance. There, the risks we are seeing in governance, and we've seen some breaches in governance in the last few decades. This is not the time to talk about that, but either missing the complexity of learning. And so, for example, if you look at how revenue is recognized, it's a gray area. It's a slippery slope, as I would call it. And errors can be made in that. So applying commercial principles to education in the eyes of the regulator is a minefield, and we have to be very, very, very careful. And I'll label it and leave it for conversation, which may happen later in the day. And then, of course, the great thing is that there are many established players in education using technology or non-formal, and then we have a burst of young, bright minds coming in, whom we term as edtechs, who are disrupting the model. It's a huge, huge thing, and that also is minefield, because you may think you have a safe business model and someone comes from behind. And this period, the last 4 or 5 years of boom, brought in many young people who may not have been very passionate about education, but very passionate about technology use in education, or very excited by the valuations. So all of that has happened. And these minefields and this quicksand thing, I think, is a caution what I wanted to give. And if you tread carefully, there's a huge amount of opportunity for us. And I want to just close with something that one of my colleagues told me when we were talking about education for profit, making it profitable. He said, it is said about the wine industry. It's called the wisdom of the wine industry, that you have to you have to do two miracles. It needs two miracles. One is to make good wine. Everybody can produce and get grapes, but to make good wine, out of tens of thousands of people who make it, there's a handful which really get to know it, right? So that's the first miracle, which is wine making. And the second is, okay, you make good wine. Now, how do you make money with good wine? So making money with good wine is a second miracle. And that's the wisdom of wine. And I saw this being so relevant to our field of education as well. We need a two miracle play. We first have to build learning that delivers outcomes to the learners. Delivers outcome, first requirement. And second is, when it's delivering outcome, is it making money or not? So anyway, the sessions today aim to help us all navigate through these issues. And we've lined up very good speakers, and I'm very grateful to all of them. They're very, very busy people. And I can already see the next two speakers. And I've also requested board members of NIIT Limited to anchor those sessions. And so three of our board members will be there. And of course, eventually my co-founder, Vijay Thadani. In summing up, he will also give his words of wisdom, as always. So with that, Neha, I think I'm done for my time. And of course, I'm watching, I'm there. And if you keep posting your questions, they will come back to us at different points in time, and we'll attempt to answer as many as we can. So with that, back to you, Neha.